One of the things that I like best about working with AI is the fact that AI essentially lets you massively leverage yourself. Instead of you being able to complete kind of one task at a time, AI lets you complete hundreds or thousands of tasks at a time. So I'm always on the lookout for good tools that might be able to help me increase my leverage. And the tool that I'm checking out today to help me do just that is called Daytona. Now, the idea of Daytona is something that you might have seen in some previous videos, but what Daytona does is that it lets you run code inside of isolated development environments on the cloud. You can see in this example that all you need to do is to create a sandbox and have a response generator that is printing this hello world command and finally deleting the sandbox. Now, there's really no risk to running that locally for you, but when the examples get more complex is when something like Daytona is ultimately going to provide its biggest benefits, whether that's AI evals, running code interpreters, coding agents, or large data analysis, reinforcement learning. Really anything that requires a lot of compute to run is going to be really nice for Daytona. A great example for this might be a website builder app that lets its users work with AI to build custom websites for themselves. Now those website builders are going to be generating a lot of code and will need environments to run that code to preview the website that the user is trying to build. So what Daytona would do is to spin up a clean and isolated environment for that code, for that website builder to run in to preview to the user. Once the user stops needing to preview the website, the sandbox can shut down. Because this was my first time using Daytona, I wanted to create a bit more simple example just to get a sense of how to actually work with it. And once again, I ended up choosing something inside the kind of finance niche and using it as a public markets research workspace that I've created here. In this example, I can do some stock research where Daytona helps me break up all the research into multiple workers, each running inside of their own sandboxed environment. So each worker essentially gets its own clear job, whether that's actually gathering the information, extracting the information, comparing information, or generating an investment memo. Each of these executions happen on their own. And we can see that pretty much everything's empty because we haven't started a run yet. So what we want to do is enter a ticker, and we can change this to some new tickers, and we can start building the briefs. And it's going to start creating these sandboxes, and we can see the orchestrator going through that process here. It's going to be starting by gathering these SEC facts and then kind of moving through the queue of everything that needs to be done. And there we go. It's completed all of the research and has generated the investment memo, which is the kind of second last step, I guess, of the dashboard. Before we jump too much into all of this, we can actually check out the Daytona dashboard and see all of the sandboxes that it's spun up to do this. These sandboxes are timed to automatically shut down via my code in, I think, 10 minutes. But we can see that it created one sandbox for each of the stocks. It created an orchestrator sandbox as well as a portfolio and macro sandbox. So without doing anything, we actually got 6 sandboxed environments to run the necessary code in. If we come over into limits as well, we can see that we're just on the free tier at the moment as we check this out. And we've got 6 out of possible 10 sandboxes running. And you can clearly see with what these rate limits are as to why this example probably isn't the best example, because even at the free tier, we're probably making minimal requests. Like we're spinning up 6 sandboxes within a 2-minute period versus the actual limit of what's possible for us is 600 in 1 minute. But jumping back to the actual demo, the first thing that we can see is the orchestrator feed. And this is giving us a high-level view of the orchestrator sandbox. So we can see that in less than a second, we got our primary live sandbox, which was this one. So if we come back to the sandboxes here, we can see it's this MQVMR. MQVMR. So that checks out. And then we can see from there it spinning up the prompts and launching the other sandboxes. So that's that creating that live macro sandbox. And then that macro sandbox is now going to complete its tasks, fetching information in 1.5 seconds, create the portfolio sandbox in less than a second, and creating the research pack, which is going to kick off a series of functions to create the research. So if we scroll down, we can see the individual run logs, and it shows that it's completed each of the research requirements from each of the stocks. From there, because we are focusing on Microsoft as our primary ticker, we then move into the kind of primary investment area, which does include the investment memo. And it actually looks like that I hit an API error inside of my OpenAI memo attempt, which is great that even though I hit that error, the environment was able to work towards a locally driven memo. So not the best, but that's something that we can ultimately audit. Down here, we can see a bit more of a breakdown as to the individual kind of worker functions to generate key components to build the investment profile, as well as all of the resources that were used from the SEC website. And as I was reviewing the code, it's been about 10 minutes of inactivity. So the code is automatically deleting these so that we're not incurring kind of any costs. And if I jump into Conductor, I can actually see the creation of the sandbox and with the parameters that we've given it. So we can see it's created it here and given it the auto stop and auto delete tags for our sandbox management. And if we look at this code here, we can see this is the stream orchestration, which is the kind of first level of sandbox that we saw, which is the orchestrator. So we can see that that's one of the first functions that is run. And from there, that's going to spin up the list of workers depending on the amount of tickers that we've inputted at the start of the project. And those tickers are created inside of this function here, which pulls out each ticker to create the sandbox and retrieve the data to build up the macro sandbox to synthesize it. Likewise, creating the portfolio sandbox and consolidating them all to build the dashboard. So while this finance example might not be particularly relevant to you and your business, hopefully what this does demonstrate is how there are tools out there like Daytona, which let you run code-based workflows in a safe cloud environment. I know that security is often top of mind for a business owner, and running code on your machine that has customer data, business documents, anything that you might feel like is too sensitive to be within an arm's reach of AI, that Daytona lets you run code in a safer way. But really the main benefit is leverage. So in this case, I was running pretty small amounts of code to complete my workflow, but there are going to be times where you're going to need to run and evaluate much more sophisticated code. And that's a real benefit here is you're no longer constrained by your machine. You're constrained by what you can do inside the browser on the cloud. And Daytona seems to do that really well. If there's a resource-heavy task that you're looking to execute on, drop a comment below or send me a DM and maybe I can walk through that as an example in a future video. Thanks.